The first indication that something was wrong came when I discovered that my own television network was running a documentary about my supposed criminal activities. I was sitting in my office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Media Tower, reviewing quarterly ratings reports, when my assistant burst through the door with a look of panic on her face. "Mr. Meridian," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to see this immediately. My name is Richard Meridian, and I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Media Group, one of the largest independent television networks in the country. What started as a single local news station in Phoenix 25 years ago had grown into a media empire with 12 television stations, 3 cable networks, and a digital streaming platform that reached 40 million households. But as I watched the documentary that was airing on my own network, a program I had never approved, never seen, and certainly never authorized, I realized that everything I had built was under attack from within. The documentary was titled The Meridian Empire: Power, Corruption, and Cover-Ups, and it painted me as a ruthless media baron who had built his fortune through bribery, extortion, and systematic abuse of power. The program featured interviews with former employees who claimed I had forced them to suppress stories that were unfavorable to my business interests. It included secretly recorded conversations that allegedly showed me discussing illegal campaign contributions to politicians who could influence media regulations. Most damaging were the financial documents that the documentary claimed proved I had been embezzling money from the company's pension fund to finance my personal investments. The evidence looked comprehensive and damning, and it was being broadcast to millions of viewers on my own network. As I watched in horror, I realized that this wasn't just an attack on my reputation. It was a carefully orchestrated coup designed to destroy me and take control of my company. The documentary concluded with a statement from the network's news director, Victoria Sterling, announcing that Meridian Media Group's board of directors had voted to suspend me pending a full investigation into the allegations. She explained that the network had a responsibility to its viewers and shareholders to maintain the highest standards of integrity, even when those standards required investigating the company's own leadership. Victoria Sterling had been my protege for 8 years, someone I had mentored, promoted, and trusted with increasing levels of responsibility. She was brilliant, ambitious, and had a talent for investigative journalism that I had always admired. I had been grooming her to eventually take over the news division, and I had considered her one of my most loyal and capable executives. Now I understood that she had been planning my downfall for months, possibly years. The phone calls started immediately, board members demanding explanations, advertisers threatening to pull their contracts, regulatory agencies announcing investigations. Within hours of the documentary's broadcast, my carefully constructed media empire was in free fall. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She had underestimated the man she was trying to destroy. I hadn't built Meridian Media Group by being naive or trusting. I had survived 25 years in one of the most cutthroat industries in America by being smarter, more prepared, and more ruthless than my competitors. I understood the power of information, the importance of documentation, and the value of strategic planning. If Victoria Sterling wanted to play the game of media manipulation and corporate warfare, she was about to learn that she was facing a master. The first step was to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the next 48 hours conducting a comprehensive analysis of the documentary, examining every claim, every piece of evidence, and every source. What I discovered was both impressive and infuriating. Victoria had been planning this attack for at least 18 months. She had systematically gathered information about my business practices, my personal finances, and my relationships with politicians and business leaders. She had cultivated sources within the company who were willing to provide her with confidential documents and insider information. But more importantly, she had been creating false evidence to support her narrative. The secretly recorded conversations were real, but they had been edited to remove crucial context that would have exonerated me. The financial documents were authentic, but they had been manipulated to suggest improprieties that didn't exist. The former employees who appeared in the documentary had been coached to present misleading or outright false testimony. Victoria Sterling hadn't just attacked me. She had committed fraud, defamation, and possibly criminal conspiracy in her effort to destroy my reputation and steal my company. The second step was to understand Victoria's motivations and identify her co-conspirators. Through careful investigation, I learned that Victoria had been working with Marcus Webb, the chairman of our board of directors, and several other board members to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Meridian Media Group. Marcus Webb was a venture capitalist who had invested in the company 5 years earlier and had been pushing for changes that would increase short-term profits at the expense of long-term stability. He had been frustrated by my resistance to his suggestions, and he had apparently decided that the solution was to remove me from leadership entirely. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Victoria would use her position as news director to create a documentary that would destroy my reputation and provide justification for the board to remove me as CEO. Marcus would then step in as interim CEO while the board conducted a search for permanent leadership, a search that would inevitably result in Victoria being promoted to CEO while Marcus maintained control as chairman. They would have effective control of a media empire worth over $2 billion, and they would have achieved it by destroying the man who had built it from nothing. But they had made several critical errors in their planning, and I was about to exploit every one of them. The third step was to gather evidence of Victoria and Marcus's conspiracy. This required careful planning and absolute secrecy, because I knew that they would be monitoring my activities and looking for any sign that I was fighting back. I hired a team of private investigators and forensic accountants, but I made sure they reported directly to me through encrypted channels and operated under strict confidentiality agreements. I also reached out to contacts in law enforcement and regulatory agencies, people who knew me personally and understood that the allegations against me were inconsistent with my character and business practices. What we discovered was a conspiracy that went far beyond what I had initially suspected. Victoria and Marcus had been planning to loot Meridian Media Group's assets through a series of transactions that would have transferred valuable properties to companies they controlled. They had been preparing to sell off the most profitable divisions while loading the remaining company with debt, effectively destroying everything I had built while enriching themselves. The documentary was just the first phase of their plan. Once I was removed as CEO, they intended to claim that the company needed to be restructured to recover from the damage caused by my supposed criminal activities. This restructuring would have involved selling assets at below-market prices to buyers who were secretly connected to Victoria and Marcus. They weren't just trying to steal my company. They were planning to destroy it and profit from the wreckage. But the most damaging discovery was evidence that Victoria had been systematically suppressing legitimate news stories that would have exposed corruption in companies that Marcus had invested in. She had been using her position as news director to protect Marcus's business interests while publicly claiming to uphold the highest standards of journalistic integrity. The woman who had accused me of corruption had been engaging in exactly the kind of unethical behavior she claimed to oppose. The fourth step was to plan my counterattack. I couldn't simply release evidence of Victoria and Marcus's conspiracy because they controlled the narrative and had the support of the board. I needed to create a moment of revelation that would be so devastating and undeniable that it would destroy their credibility and expose their crimes to the entire industry. The opportunity came in the form of the annual National Association of Broadcasters Convention, scheduled to take place in Las Vegas 3 weeks after Victoria's documentary had aired. This was the most important gathering in the television industry, with thousands of executives, journalists, and industry leaders attending presentations, panels, and networking events. Victoria had been scheduled to give a keynote address about the importance of investigative journalism and corporate accountability. She was planning to use the speech to further attack my reputation while positioning herself as a champion of ethical journalism. I had different plans for her keynote address. Working with my team of investigators and a group of loyal employees who had remained hidden during Victoria's purge, I prepared a comprehensive presentation that would expose the truth about Victoria and Marcus's conspiracy. But I couldn't simply interrupt her speech or demand equal time. I needed to be more strategic and more devastating. Instead, I arranged for the evidence to be presented through the convention's own media systems. The NAB convention featured live streaming of all major presentations, with feeds going to television stations and news organizations around the world. I made sure that my presentation would be broadcast to the entire industry at the moment when Victoria was expecting her greatest triumph. The keynote address was held in the convention center's main auditorium, with an audience of over 3,000 industry professionals. Victoria took the stage looking confident and composed, ready to deliver what she believed would be the speech that established her as a major figure in broadcast journalism. She began with her usual eloquence, speaking about the responsibility of journalists to hold powerful people accountable and the importance of maintaining ethical standards even when investigating one's own organization. She talked about the difficult decision to expose my supposed crimes and the courage required to challenge authority when the truth demanded it. The audience was receptive, applauding her apparent integrity and commitment to journalistic principles. Victoria was in her element, commanding the stage with the charisma and intelligence that had made her such an effective news director. But 15 minutes into her speech, the large screens behind her began displaying a very different kind of presentation. The first images showed financial documents proving that Victoria had been receiving secret payments from Marcus Webb's investment firm for over 2 years. The payments were disguised as consulting fees, but they clearly represented compensation for her cooperation in the conspiracy against me. The next section revealed the edited audio recordings that Victoria had used in her documentary, along with the complete, unedited versions that showed the true context of my conversations. The comparison made it clear that Victoria had deliberately manipulated evidence to create a false narrative. The presentation then exposed the network of shell companies that Victoria and Marcus had established to facilitate their planned looting of Meridian Media Group's assets. The documents showed detailed plans for asset transfers, debt restructuring, and executive compensation that would have enriched the conspirators while destroying the company. But the most devastating section revealed Victoria's suppression of legitimate news stories that would have exposed corruption in Marcus's portfolio companies. The evidence included emails, internal memos, and recorded conversations that showed Victoria deliberately killing investigations and intimidating reporters who tried to pursue stories that would have damaged Marcus's business interests. The final section of the presentation was a compilation of secretly recorded conversations between Victoria and Marcus, captured during their planning meetings over the past 6 months. The recordings revealed their true motivations, their contempt for the company's employees and shareholders, and their detailed plans for destroying everything I had built. The audience watched in stunned silence as Victoria's carefully constructed image crumbled before their eyes. The woman who had positioned herself as a champion of ethical journalism was revealed as a corrupt conspirator who had betrayed every principle she claimed to uphold. Victoria tried to continue her speech, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She attempted to claim that the documents were fabricated, but the presentation included verification from independent forensic experts who had authenticated every piece of evidence. As the full scope of Victoria and Marcus's conspiracy became clear, the audience's mood shifted from confusion to outrage. These were industry professionals who understood the importance of journalistic integrity, and they were witnessing the exposure of someone who had systematically violated every ethical standard they held sacred. Victoria left the stage in disgrace, abandoning her speech and fleeing the auditorium as the audience erupted in discussion about what they had witnessed. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, providing additional evidence and context that made the conspiracy impossible to deny or minimize. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within hours of the presentation, the FBI announced that they were opening a criminal investigation into Victoria and Marcus's activities. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched their own investigation into the planned asset transfers and financial manipulations. Meridian Media Group's board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to reinstate me as CEO while suspending Victoria and removing Marcus as chairman. The board members who had supported the conspiracy were forced to resign, and new directors were appointed to ensure proper oversight. Victoria Sterling was arrested 2 weeks later on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and securities violations. The evidence I had gathered made the case straightforward for prosecutors, and Victoria eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy trial that would have further damaged her reputation. Marcus Webb faced both criminal charges and civil lawsuits from investors who had been defrauded by his schemes. His investment firm collapsed, and he was forced to declare bankruptcy while facing the possibility of decades in prison. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the impact on the broader media industry. The exposure of Victoria and Marcus's conspiracy sparked conversations about corporate governance, journalistic ethics, and the importance of protecting independent media from hostile takeovers. Other media companies implemented stronger safeguards against internal conspiracies, and industry organizations developed new standards for investigating allegations against senior executives. The scandal became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of maintaining ethical standards even in highly competitive industries. 6 months after the NAB convention that destroyed Victoria's career and exposed Marcus's crimes, I sat in my office reviewing plans for expanding Meridian Media Group into new markets. The company had not only survived the attack but had emerged stronger, with improved governance structures and a renewed commitment to journalistic integrity. My reputation had been fully restored, and I had gained recognition throughout the industry as someone who had successfully defended his company against a sophisticated conspiracy. The experience had been painful, but it had also demonstrated the importance of preparation, documentation, and strategic thinking in protecting what you've built. Victoria Sterling had thought she could destroy me by manipulating the very medium I had mastered, but she had forgotten that I had spent 25 years learning how to use information as a weapon. She had underestimated the man who had built a media empire from nothing and who understood better than anyone the power of controlling the narrative. Marcus Webb had thought he could steal my company through financial manipulation and board politics, but he had failed to understand that I had survived in the media industry by being more ruthless and more prepared than my competitors. He had tried to play a game where I had been setting the rules for decades. The notification sound from my computer interrupted my thoughts. It was an email from a potential acquisition target, a small but innovative streaming service that wanted to discuss a partnership with Meridian Media Group. They had heard about our company's resilience and ethical standards, and they wanted to be part of an organization that had proven it could withstand attacks while maintaining its integrity. I smiled as I began drafting my response. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand our reach, and new chances to prove that success built on genuine value and ethical practices was more durable than success built on deception and manipulation. The media mogul had learned that in the information age, the most powerful weapon isn't the ability to create false narratives. It's the ability to reveal the truth at exactly the right moment. Victoria Sterling had tried to destroy me with lies and manipulation, but she had forgotten that in the media business, the truth always makes for a better story. In the end, her conspiracy had been just another news story, and I had made sure it was told correctly. The woman who had tried to control the narrative had learned that some stories are too big to suppress, and some truths are too powerful to hide. The man who had built his empire on the power of information had used that same power to protect everything he had created. And in doing so, he had reminded the entire industry that integrity, preparation, and strategic thinking would always triumph over ambition, deception, and betrayal.